Well, joining us in studio to discuss the post-elections in Zimbabwe, our international political expert, Dr. Charles Sinkala, the founder of the African Youth Empowerment, Tinotenda Mavaneka, legal analyst, Tashinga Sakuya, a student at Monash, South Africa, actually Monash, South Africa's SRC president, Niraj Madzivanika. Hope I said that right. A very good evening to you all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Maybe I should start with you. If you can just talk to us about what the atmosphere is like currently in Zimbabwe. I mean, the election day itself was quite violence-free, but we've seen the last few days a lot of violence erupting. We've had even a couple of deaths occurring and some arrests taking place.
Yes, according to the law, the police and the army say that they were working within the bounds of the law. And yes, they may say that, but morally and speaking about the issue on people who were protesting, even though they were violent, the force which was used was unnecessary. Live ammunition should not be used on any civilians. I think in this day and age, that should not be the case, that people should be shot and die in the streets of Harare just because they are protesting. Yes, there was a violent protest because they were burning cars. Also, there's a part of fault on the MDC's alliance side, whereby they didn't control the crowd and they didn't control their own people. The leadership of MDC was not there on the ground with their people. So I personally think that both sides are to blame here, but then the force which was used is unnecessary.
Well, let me come to you. Do you also think that the force was unnecessary? Do you think that there's one party to blame over another, or was it just the people that were, or elements of criminality that just crept into the march?
I think it was more of a tragedy what happened in Zimbabwe. The loss of life is always a sad thing to go about, but when I look at what happened overall in the whole situation and how far Zimbabwe has come in the past 12 months, as a young person who comes from Zimbabwe, who understands how many problems we have in our country, I choose to look at it like there will always be mistakes and flaws that will come across, and we need to stay calm in this period and focus on the bigger goal, which is getting our economy working.
And Doctor, what do you think about what's happening, the situation in Zimbabwe currently? I mean, should people not have been patient enough to allow at least results coming out, not even by Friday, but it's just been about a few days? Shouldn't they just have waited patiently for the collation and verification process to take place?
No, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. You see, it's a sad situation that some lives have been lost. We sympathize with their families, and this should have been avoided. You see, we must also understand that Zimbabwe has been put into a very bad transition, you know, as way back as 2001, when all these situations started happening in Zimbabwe, when ZANU-PF, headed by R.J. Mugabe, lost the grip on the power. And this, I think, is an inbuilt situation into the mindset of the Zimbabweans. And I think the country, they couldn't wait for another phase of torture. And I don't even understand why elections in Africa takes almost about 5 days to announce. I mean, we're talking about the population of about 4 million voters were registered, and I think the ones to cast those votes should be less than that. And I was arguing with somebody when I was coming from Zimbabwe this afternoon to observe some elections that, you know, it's unfortunate that Africa, we've been branded that we can't count. We fail to count even up to 4,000. I mean, this should have been avoided, that the results should supposed to be announced within the period of 24 hours. I mean, we've seen these elections happen in South Africa, also in the United States of America and elsewhere in the world. The results should be within 24 hours, because immediately somebody closes the voting stations, those results are supposed to be populated to the people to avoid this anxiety and the protest from the people.
Maybe the technology available as well would actually help if it's electronic, and you know, they can just punch in the figures and have them automatically appearing at these ZEC headquarters. Niraj, how does it make you feel to be sitting here in South Africa and watching what's going on at home, people losing their lives the way that they have been?
So my heart and my prayers go out to the families of those who lost their lives. during the protests that were happening in Zimbabwe. And I'd like to agree with what my colleagues have said, that more should have been done to keep peace without having to resort to violence. Yes, there are provisions in the law that talk about when police fail to handle such big crowds, they can call in the military. But I feel that we should have looked at the spirit of the law and not just the letter of the law, because more should have been done to stabilize the situation by the police. So I feel that as a young person, the police haven't done enough to make sure that there is safety and sanity in the whole proceedings that were happening. So that's my view.
Tina, I want us to talk about achieving the Zimbabwe you want to see. I mean, you spoke about being a young person and that you aspire to see as Zimbabwe in a better place than where it is currently. As a young person, did you take the opportunity to actually make your voice heard through making the mark on the ballot paper? Did you vote?
I was unable to vote due to work constraints within the country I work within, South Africa. However, what I did do within the past 12 months, since I felt inspired by the change that had happened in Zimbabwe when the former president stepped down, I took the initiative to start a platform where young people can speak and learn from others on how to develop our continent. Because for too long, the African continent has not been spoken of in a clear way. We have not had our own voice, our own opportunity, our own way of building our businesses, our own culture, respect for that. And that's what my organization looks towards doing. As a young person, I started this organization with the help of all people who were looking to just give their own input and their own knowledge. And we managed to partner up with a lot of amazing organizations across the continent and across Zimbabwe. And we had a discussion called the New Zimbabwe Forum, which reached over 900,000 people in South Africa, where we were talking about solutions for a new Zimbabwe. And I think that is what us as young people need to do. We need to look at what we have and make the most of it and try and make a difference. And that is what my platform is about.
Okay. And Niraj, did you get to vote? I mean, you are leading the SRC in the university that you attend currently, so you actually have a position of authority to influence young minds with regards to, elections and how they can actually influence their own economies.
True. Unfortunately, because the voting started whilst school had already started, I was unable to go and perform my national duty to vote. But we also would like to ask the government to make provisions that allow people who are not necessarily in Zimbabwe to be allowed to get their voice heard. In other countries, they can go and vote at the embassies, which will be more convenient and more cost effective, because many factors come into play when we reach election season. So unfortunately, I was not able to go and vote, but I would like to see a situation where there are more provisions to allow Zimbabweans' voices to be heard regardless of where they are, because we are no less Zimbabwean when we come out of Zimbabwe.
Very true. And Tashinga, do you also think that perhaps making the election day a public holiday in Zimbabwe would help those who have to work on election day to actually be able to go and cast their ballots, apart from allowing people that are outside to vote at embassies? Okay.
Does it refer to people in Zimbabwe or
in Zimbabwe? If Zimbabwe declares election day a holiday, like in South Africa, it's a public holiday when it's election day. It actually increases the number of people who are available to go and vote on that day.
No, according to the Constitution, people should not work, and they're allowed to go cast their vote on election day. So everyone who wants to go cast their vote on election day, they're allowed to by the law. Even if you are working, you're allowed to leave your work and go and cast your vote and come back to work. So I think the law allows them to do that.
All right. And in terms of the youth involvement in this, I mean, we're talking about the future of Zimbabwe, the brighter Zimbabwe, that new dawn in the country. Do you think that young people should be playing a bigger role than they are currently to influence the future? Yes,
they should, because most of us don't even go vote. I know, according to, I was at Wits University. At the time I was there were 3,500 Zimbabwean students. And if you ask them, do they go vote? They don't. And there are a lot of us here, like there are a lot of universities, and most of us are actually in South Africa studying. But most of us don't go vote. We'll be busy on Twitter and Facebook.
But why? Why is everyone speaking on social media, on television, and not actually going to the country, making your mark? Because that's where your voice actually counts the most on that ballot paper. Why don't young Zimbabweans vote?
Maybe some have lost hope, and because some are working here, they find it here comfortable, so they don't feel the need of going back home to vote. So I've had people like on election day, they flew back to Zimbabwe to go vote, my close friends. They went home to vote. But then that's 2-3 people in a space of 1,000 people who are going to vote. So I feel like if Zimbabweans, young Zimbabweans register to vote and go vote, they will be changed. But if you leave the country in the hands of people in the rural areas who do not have social media or Twitter or this Facebook, they will vote for what they think is right, and which is the current government, because they got land from them. So it's because ZANU-PF used the system of patronage to run the country. So as long as they keep doing that, they'll keep winning, even if we contest it. But then we are not voting as youth.
Dr. Sinkala, what should be done, I mean, to encourage these young people to fly back home and vote, or, vote in the embassies if the government can allow them? Because he's mentioning that the people who are now voting are those in rural areas who don't even have access to information about the people they're voting for. So they're voting for parties and members of parties based on last year's information, 5 years ago's information, but the ones who have the information, the current information, are sitting here not voting.
If you keep them in the studio like this, I don't think they can cast their vote.
It's not, I mean, it's 7:45 p.m. They should have voted on Monday.
No, yeah, but they knew that they were going to come to the studio, so they were planning to come to the studio. Look, that is the biggest problem which is happening in our continent, especially Africa. And we dare say that we need to reform our electoral processes, because a population of about almost close to 16 million people in Zimbabwe, it's been decided by less than 4 million people, and our international communities like the SADC region and the AU, even the observers, I mean, before you even go to announce that these elections can be conducted, there are certain things which the bodies has to make sure that they have been laid. I give an example to the World Cup. I mean, the FIFA body, before they award the contract for somebody to host the World Cup, they go check the infrastructure, the logistics. How are they going to handle the people, starting from the airport to ablution blocks and everything. But you find that in Africa, we hold elections even when we've got a representation of about 4 million against 16 million voters. So some other places and areas where these people were voting, they are remote areas where they don't even have access to electricity. So the counting also has been a challenge to them, and not only that, the access to voter registration, also they're incapacitated, as these bodies like the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission hasn't been funded fully, to handle this type of transition of the elections. And not only the people within Zimbabwe, but also if you look at the young men who have showed interest, that it should have been nice if they were part of and parcel of the transition of the government, by exercising their constitutional right. Facilities like people outside, you can't take everybody outside the country, to go back to Zimbabwe to vote, or any other country. Is quite expensive. I mean, some they're in formal employment, some they're in education, things which you cannot interrupt. But, because of the technology which we have now, we can create some systems where we can have these people to cast their votes. I mean, biometrics, they work far much better. Somebody can even vote from their cell phones. If we can create a system which is transparent and it can be trusted, that we have people and citizens choosing government which they dare choose. I mean, we've seen the protest of most of the young people in Zimbabwe has been protesting regarding the elections. I mean, they are also shocked because most of the constituencies has been won by the ZANU-PF, and they're wondering how and who was voting for the ZANU-PF, because the young people, they want transition. They don't want just to take Mugabe. They want all his ship to sink, because ZANU-PF has been on the cause of reducing Zimbabwe to its knees, you know, where it is, and they thought another new generation can take over. But, you know, there's a lot of things and flaws in between these electoral processes, and that democracy is not based on the meritocracy of how to handle the, you know, communities. So until such a time that we define democracy, the electoral processes include everybody who's part and parcel, because then we can have a margin. I mean, if I was a president of Zimbabwe, I mean, and there's a voter registration of 4 million against my population of 16 million, I'll call off the elections, because there's no representation. At least supposed to be at least 50% of the voters to decide which government they're supposed to take.
But shouldn't the Electoral Commission also have a say in that and say, well, President, we only have 4,000 people registered compared to the population? I mean, shouldn't they also have a voice in that? Can't they also stop or postpone the elections?
It is an institution which is under the ruling government, and they tell them what to do. And,
political interference.
Of course. So there's no separation of powers on these institutions, because you've got people into positions of government who are larger than institutions. So one person can instruct the commissioner of the electoral process that go ahead or don't announce or don't do this. So this is a problem. There's no trust into the constitution to compel certain individuals to carry out something which is free and fair, rather. You know, if you talk about a competition must be fair, from both sides, you know. And if you talk about soccer, you know, even the people are defeated, they even sometimes exchange the shirts, or they hug each other, they say you are the better. But our politics in Africa, no one accepts losing the elections because of the flaws which are in between.
Well, Tina, just coming to you, you mentioned that, you know, you have an organization that's doing a lot of things, a lot of talking going on about plans on what can be done. In terms of action, when can young people be encouraged to start registering? I mean, elections have passed now, so before the next general election, what can be done to encourage more young Zimbabweans to register to vote? Because if you're not registered, you can't vote.
I think the first thing we need to look at is to use the digital space, or to use these means of communication to show a narrative that if you do participate in elections, your voice can be heard. With the case of Zimbabwe, this organization that we came up with was founded on the idea that last year it looked as if there was no hope in the country. And when, like I said before, when the presidency changed, it felt like, and the new president came into power, it felt like there was an objective to get the economy moving. The country has been sort of stagnant, and as a young person, we suffer the most in terms of things like employment. So sometimes for us, it's not so much about the face that's in charge. It's about being able to look after each other, being able to empower ourselves, being able to go back home and run a business and start a business there and help people get jobs there. So what we want to encourage young people to do in this space between now and when the election results come out and after is to encourage them to look at what the government is doing, hold them accountable, communicate with the government, communicate with people who are in power, and find out what the problem is, find out where you can contribute, where you can fit, because the objective needs to be to get us to that vision that you're speaking of.
So you have to be a part of the solution as young people.
Exactly.
Now, Tashinga, just talk to us in 1 minute about the issue of transparency and the credibility of the election.
Well, when the election started, the voting part, people might call it transparent and credible. But when the counting came to the counting now, that's where the problem started, whereby the MDC is alleging that there's missing V11 forms. They didn't receive some of them, and the other party alleging that, but everyone signed the forms. And also, when it comes to the announcements of the results, that's where most people are feeling that it's not credible. Yeah, like I was listening to the EU, they say that the voting part was okay, but when it came to
Credibility of the counting.
Of the counting and the movement of the ballots, the V11s, and also the announcement of the results. They feel like there is less transparency there, that the president's results were counted first, but then they are not announced up until this time. So I think I cannot comment.
But clearly more still has to be done.
Yeah, more
there
has
is
to be.
hope, though. There is definitely hope.
Yeah, there is hope that something can be done regarding the counting and regarding the announcement. Well, since Zek said that they will announce the results from 10 p.m. tonight, hopefully we'll see what
Let's
the results.
wait and see what happens. Thank you so
Yes.
much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Moving along, before we wrap up this bulletin, Police Minister Bheki Cele has launched an investigation against EFF leader Julius Malema. And this comes after a video emerged of Malema firing shots from an assault rifle on social media. Lobby group AfriForum laid criminal charges against the EFF leader in Centurion on Wednesday. AfriForum believes that Malema contravened multiple gun laws. The EFF leader is, however, refuting the claims, insinuating that he was using a toy gun. We're just reiterating that Police Minister Bheki Cele has launched an investigation against EFF leader Julius Malema, and this comes after a video emerged of Malema firing shots from an assault rifle on social media. Lobby group AfriForum laid criminal charges against the EFF leader in Centurion on Wednesday. AfriForum believes that Malema contravened multiple gun laws. The EFF leader is, however, refuting the claims, insinuating that he was using a toy gun. We'll try and get the National Police spokesperson to give a comment on that story. That is where we leave it for tonight on Prime Time News. From myself and the crew behind the scenes, thank you so much for tuning in and staying with us. Sanang Nitsofets.